Please face the flag of our nation and recognize the principles for which it stands. Department 1 is now in session. The Honorable Mark E. Windham, Judge, presiding.
Please be seated, everyone. Good morning. Welcome back to Department 1, People versus Robert Durst. Mr. Durst is present. And he's with Mr. Chesnov and Mr. DeGuerin, Mr. Lewis. We have, oh, there's Mr. Balian and Mr. Lewin. I saw him earlier. But, okay, and Mr. Miata, Mr. Milius. We have Mr. Henderson at council table. We've...
Mr. Bailey and I would like to talk to you on the side for a moment.
Oh, okay. This is one of our rare sidebars. Let me take a moment to see what this is about. Oh. We can, I brought a pillow. Do you think if we gave you one of the court's rolling chairs? That'd be better?
Yeah.
Yeah, why don't we roll that into the aisle? And
We don't have 23 of them though. So.
Sorry, guys. It's all a ruse. I just wanted a better chair.
juror number 10, if you're more, juror number 10, I don't know if, let's see, now that's the only other issue is you want to scoot over one seat. I know you're kind of close to our lectern, but if we can be mindful of that, maybe we can maintain adequate distance.
Okay.
Very much appreciated.
Sure, sure. Well, thank the lawyers from each side noticed. So that's good. Okay. And then when we use the council use the lectern, make sure you scoot over just a little bit more past that green dot, and I'll remind you. All right, but at this point, we're not using the lectern. We're returning to the video recording of testimony by Miriam Barnes. So, again, we treat this as the same as a testimony from a live witness, treated equally. Mr. Henderson, you may begin the recording.
Thank you, Your Honor. Again, this is the testimony of Miriam Barnes. It's gone back about 6 seconds. This is 45 minutes and 2 seconds. We have an hour and 4 minutes left.
House here.
Very skilled.
Please do your best to articulate it the best you can as to your state of mind and why you didn't go to the police with this information.
Because I was very frightened of him. It started everything, I started thinking about his wife and then Susan, and I'm going, oh my God, I don't want to have anything to do with this. I'm just so, I don't want to, I don't want to have anything to do with this. And he was petrified. I still am.
Who were you afraid for?
Me.
Was there anyone else other than you that you were afraid for?
No.
As time passed, in the years that followed, 2 or 3 years that followed, did you go to the police then?
No.
Did you learn anything new that made you even more afraid?
Oh, the man in Texas.
What did you learn and how did it affect your decision not to come forth to the police?
That Robert Durst will kill anybody who will talk against him.
Just tell us, what have you heard about the man in Texas?
It was on the news. It was in the newspapers that he had murdered a man, cut him up. It was scary. It was like, it just compounded everything for me. It was, I I don't have anything to do with this.
When you say he, I assume you're talking about Robert Durst.
Yes.
You know an individual named Stephen Greenhouse?
Yes.
Who is that?
He is a childhood friend who's still a friend.
You've known him for many years.
All my life.
How did you meet him? What's the familial relationship between you?
Stephen's mother and my mother went through school grew up together, and they were only children, and so we were like family.
Okay. Did you ever go to school with Stephen?
No.
Have you kept in touch with Mr. Greenhouse throughout the years?
Yes.
What was his occupation before?
He wrote to labor columns in the New York Times.
Does he still do that?
No, he retired a year ago. 2 years.
Did you have any other professions other than being a reporter?
He's a lawyer.
After Susan Berman's murder in Phoenix, did you ever contact Stephen Green?
Yes.
About how long after this funeral went to and the realization that Bobby Durst was involved?
Either a few weeks or maybe a month, because the reason I had the Christmas party is I had friends visiting from France with children.
Now, you say he was a friend, and you say he was a reporter. In what capacity were you calling him? Were you calling him as a reporter? Were you calling him as a friend? Why were you calling him?
I was calling him as a friend, as a lawyer, as one of the most ethical people I know.
He's also a lawyer?
Yes.
So when you spoke with Greenhouse, did you tell him about this conversation you had with Susan Berman years earlier
Yes.
that we've been discussing here today?
Yes.
What did Greenhouse, if anything, tell you?
He said I had to call the authorities. He's very ethical. And yeah.
How adamant was he that you should come forward?
He said, I understand and you have to do what you have to do, but this is very important. And, he tried to get me to come forward.
At that time, was he successful
No.
in trying to convince you?
No.
Why not?
I just wasn't ready. I was too scared.
For the record, Stephen Greenhouse is STEVENGREENHOUSE.
Thank you.
For the court reporter, I'm just make life easier.
What exactly was Stephen Greenhouse telling you to the best of your time?
And I should come forward, that it was my obligation.
Was he saying who you should come forward to, if you remember?
Well, first it was to the authorities, and then it was, well, do you rather talk to, a reporter? And I said neither.
You didn't want to talk to anyone?
I didn't want to talk to him.
Were you aware, eventually, of a show entitled Jinx that aired on HBO?
I was aware of it, yes.
Did you watch that show?
No, I had no.
Is there a particular reason you didn't watch it?
Just seeing Robert Durst. Friends.
Okay. Did you hear about what happened on the show?
Oh, everybody had to tell me.
Did you ever have a conversation with Stephen Greenhouse about what happened on the show?
Yeah.
Was anyone present when you had this conversation with Stephen Greenhouse?
His wife.
His wife?
I think my brother was there, my nephews, and my mom. It was at my mom's house. They were coming to visit her because she passed in October, and people on Sundays, people would come. They were family. They would come to see her.
And when you say his wife, are you referring to Stephen Greenhouse as well?
Yes, Miriam Barnes.
And Miriam, same spelling as your name?
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Reinhardt, REINHARTH. did you, after they told you what had been going on with Jinx, tell them again about this conversation you had with Susan Berman years earlier?
I think so. We just talked. It was a lot of talk. I maybe was being a little editing myself because my mom was in the room.
Okay. At that point in time, did Mr. Greenhouse again urge you to come forth to somebody?
Mm-hmm.
Yes?
Yeah.
Who was he trying to get you to come forth?
Well, he had a friend who was a reporter who was working on the story, and would I talk to him?
Did what you heard them tell you about what happened or what was displayed on the Jinx affect your state of mind about whether you should or shouldn't come forth with this information to somebody? In other words, do you understand the question?
Yes, I do. I'm just trying to think because I really tried to stay away from that show. But when everybody was telling me about what he said at the end, yes.
What is it that affected you?
That he admitted killing these people.
When you say you're talking about Robert Durst?
Yes.
Do you know someone named Charles Bagley?
Yes, I do.
Who is that?
He's a reporter that called me.
How did you come in contact with Mr. Bagley?
I told him. He called me.
He called you. Do you know how he got your number?
Stephen asked me if it would be okay.
Okay, so Stephen asked you if what would be okay?
If Charlie Bagley called me.
Did you agree that you would speak with Charlie Bagley?
Yes.
And he contacted you?
Yes.
About how long ago was your phone?
And it was about a year and a half ago.
Let me ask you this. Were you aware at some point in time that Mr. Durst had been arrested on this case?
No.
You never became aware that he had been arrested and charged with murder of Susan Berman?
No. I don't think I thought about it. I don't think I remember.
Okay.
I didn't want to follow it. I just
Let me ask
wanted to
you.
be left alone.
Just trying to establish a timeline. Let me ask it this way. How long was it approximately after you heard about the Jinx was it that you eventually spoke with Charlie Bagley?
Maybe a few weeks.
Okay. So it was not years later.
No.
It was close period to that time?
Yes.
It was close in time to that event? Yes?
Yes.
Okay. Did you initially when you spoke with Charlie Bagley, did you tell him you didn't? Initially?
No.
The next time, did you speak with him on multiple occasions?
Yes.
The second time you spoke with him, did you tell him you didn't?
He asked me questions about Susan, as being a friend of Susan's, and he would question me and talk to me about that. And I said, and I answered a lot of his questions, but we had an understanding that he could never use my name and it can't go in the paper.
Okay. Describe to the court, did you initially, during those first couple of conversations, disclose to Charlie Bagley this conversation you had with Susan Berman years prior?
I didn't right away.
How persistent was Mr. Bagley in calling you and trying to get information from you?
On and off, but when he did speak to me, he was persistent.
When you say he was persistent when he spoke, can you tell the court what you mean by that? How was he persistent?
Well, about using my name, about getting, he did a lot of questioning, I remember him even, about Susan's her phobias and her kind of craziness. And he would say, and I remember him saying, how could you be her friend? You know, but you just were her friend.
Okay. Was he ever persistent in getting you to allow him to use your name and put what you said in this article?
Yes.
How persistent was he in that?
The last two maybe conversations we had.
Did you eventually agree to let him use your name and give the information you had provided him about the conversation in an article?
Yes.
Why did you eventually agree to do that?
First he told me that Bobby Durst was very ill.
Why?
He told me that Bobby was very ill. So to be honest, and people in the room, it's a terrible thing to say, but I was hoping that I would never have to come to this because he would be dead. And my mother had just passed, and so nothing could, I was tired. He called me at work at 8 o'clock in the morning or something, 8:30 in the morning. And
You just testified that you heard he was ill, you thought he would probably die relatively quickly. You testified that your mother had just passed away. I believe you testified that you were tired. He called you 8:30 in the morning. Is it fair to say that he kind of caught you at a weak point?
Yes.
For the reasons you testified to, you hoping that you wouldn't have to testify because Robert Durst, given his age and condition, would die. The fact that your mother had just passed away, the fact that you were at a weak point in your life, the fact that it was 8:30 in the morning, the fact that you were tired. Did Charlie Bagley eventually catch you at a weak point, a weak moment, where you agreed to give your name?
yeah.
Agreed to allow you to use your name?
Yes.
How much did you consider the consequences of that decision that day to let Charlie Bagley read your name in this article with this information?
I didn't.
If you could do it again, would you allow Mr. Bagley to print what you told him with your name?
No.
Why not?
I don't want to be here.
Why not?
It's not going to bring Susan back. And it's very frightening.
Are you still scared of Robert Durst?
Yes.
Did you read this Charlie Bagley article?
One with me in it?
Yes.
He emailed it or texted it to me. I was at work and he called me and said, "Did you read it?" And I was in such a, not want denial that usually in the morning when I was driving to work, there's a 7-Eleven around the corner from my house, and I would stop and pick up the Times, and that morning I just kept driving.
Did you eventually read it?
She sent it to me.
Did you read it?
He said, "Yes, of course I did."
Was it accurate?
Yes.
So, as much as you don't want to be here, I'm going to order you to return here tomorrow as well, and that'll be at 10 o'clock. But do not speak with any other witness about your testimony. Resume the witness stand. You remain your oath. Lewis is prepared to cross-examine. You may. Proceed. You may proceed.
Good morning, Mrs. Barnes. I'm sorry, Ms. Barnes. My name is Chip Lewis. I've never had the pleasure of meeting you before. We haven't spoken. I assure you, Ms. Barnes, that this is going to be a much more congenial exercise than what we've experienced in the last couple of days. Before I get into the meat of the questions I have, I want to clarify one thing. You were married. You married Gerald in 1978?
Yeah.
Prior to your testimony here yesterday, you have met and or spoken with the prosecution several times, correct?
A few times, yes.
At least 5 times.
Okay.
First on December 27th of 2016 in the morning, they called you at your office, correct?
Yes.
Later that evening, they called you back at your home.
Yes.
You spoke again with members of the prosecution on January 27th of 2017.
I don't have the dates written down, but that's what it is.
Does that sound about right, ma'am?
Yes.
You again spoke with the prosecution on April the 3rd of 2017.
Yes, sir.
Fresh March 3rd. Sound about right?
Sounds right.
And then, at least last, a couple days ago when you got here to Los Angeles with Detective Camacho and Mr. Bailey,
Yes.
that first call to your office, in the morning time, I believe it was?
Yes.
The later call to your house in the evening, do you remember about what time that was? Before or after dinner?
It had to be after 7 because I didn't get home. I didn't get home from work till about after 7.
You would agree with me that all told on the 27th, you spoke with the prosecution for almost an hour and a half.
I didn't look at the clock, but it seemed like a long time.
On that note, would you be surprised to learn, Ms. Barnes, that you spoke a total of 4,261 words during that almost 90 minutes?
We had it at 4,273.
Would you be surprised?
No.
Well, it's fair to say Mr. Lewin had a lot to say. Is that a fair statement? Let me tell you this one. This isn't a trick question. I've had the pleasure of hundreds of conversations with Mr. Lewin, and I realize it's hard to get a word in edgewise. Would you agree with that?
No.
Well, Mr. Bailey and Detective Schmalling were also on the phone for those two calls, right?
Yes.
You recall either one of them saying a word?
Yes.
After hello.
Yes.
Yesterday, Ms. Barnes, the prosecution went to great lengths to establish your level of certainty regarding what I will call the Susan Berman conversation. Okay?
Mm-hmm.
You got to answer yes or no.
Yes.
You will call Mr. Bailey and ask you how sure are you about Susan Berman saying yes. How certain are you about Susan Berman saying why? You recall those questions?
Yes.
I want to explore the X, Y, and Z for just a few minutes. First of all, there was conversation about whether or not Ms. Berman, what she told you, whether she added that this was a good or bad thing that she had done. Recall that?
Right. Yes.
Slide one, please. We can do it this way.
Just a moment. And adjust the inputs.
Your Honor, may I approach Mr. Barnes so she can have a copy?
Good, okay.
Ma'am, for ease of reference, I'm going to give you a copy of what we're going to examine relative to this statement. Ms. Barnes, did you have a chance to look at that?
Yes, I did.
So relative to the statement or the issue of whether or not Ms. Berman disclosed to you whether what she had done was good or bad, do you recall Mr. Lewin asked you about that originally? And if I'm reading correctly, the question was, could you just repeat it? If you pretend you're Susan right now, and if you just say, hey, what'd she say in the best of your memory? Your response, something, I did something today. Whether that I said, you know, I don't know whether she said it was good or bad. Correct?
Correct.
And then 30 seconds later, Mr. Lewin asks you, makes a statement. And when you said you weren't sure if it was good or bad, what she had done, but you also mentioned that she was distraught. Again, I want to make sure I'm not putting words in your mouth. I'm just trying to understand it the way you're describing it. It doesn't sound like it was a good thing she did. And your answer was?
Didn't seem like it, but I didn't know for sure.
But after Mr. Lewin's description there, your answer wasn't, I wasn't sure it was right. Correct?
Yeah.
In fairness to you, Ms. Barnes, after having said you weren't sure, you agree with Mr. Lewin's contention, right?
Yes.
Because you couldn't recall whether she had actually said it was good or bad from her words, her mouth, could you?
No.
Now, you mentioned yesterday, understandably, that you were concerned for your safety relative to making any disclosure about hearing this conversation that you had with Ms. Berman. Did I catch that right?
Many years later, but not at that time.
In the years since then, that, as you told this court, held you back from coming to it. Is that fair?
Yes.
Now, do you recall when you spoke with Mr. Lewin, y'all discussed concerns for your safety?
Yes.
Do you recall that Mr. Lewin shared your concern for your safety? He repeated that to you, correct?
He understood what I was saying, yes.
Mr. Bailey, call 1, page 18, 8 through 13. You have that? Will you take a look, Ms. Barnes, at lines 8 through 13? This is called page 18.
Oh, 18.
That's okay. 1 second, Ms. Barnes. We gotta get to that. Yes. You got that, Ms. Barnes?
Yes.
So, Mr. Lewin is telling you, relative to y'all's discussion about your concerns, that someone from Mr. Durst's defense team may try to contact you.
Yes.
And that admonition certainly didn't make you feel safer, did it?
No.
And in fact, Mr. Lewin's admonition, when a gentleman named David Fetchheimer called you, you declined to speak with him.
Yes, I did.
And you understood, ma'am, that Mr. Fetchheimer was a representative investigator for Mr. Durst's legal team.
Yes.
And after declining to speak to Mr. Fetchheimer, you followed Mr. Lewin's directive, and you called to tell him that Mr. Fetchheimer is gone. Well, let's make sure I didn't miscapture anything. I promise you this is going to be convenient. I won't deliver on my promise. Let's go to call 2, page 29. lines 16 through 27. Read that to yourself, Ms. Barnes, for reasons of expediency.
Yeah.
So, in that conversation, Mr. Good, again, this is the second call, reiterated his concerns about us contacting you. You're right.
Yes.
That's different from the first call. This is the second call, right?
Yes, so, yes. You have the information.
To be clear, Ms. Barnes, Bob Durst has never threatened you guys.
No.
Yet neither before nor after the article was published in the New York Times.
That's correct.
In fact, after your testimony here yesterday, you did not receive any threats, did you?
No.
Actually, as you stated yesterday, based on your interaction with Mr. Durst at that party many years ago, you frankly thought he was an arrogant asshole.
Yes.
Creepy.
Excuse me?
Creepy.
Kind of, yeah.
Not threatening.
No.
Let's turn a minute. I want to make sure I accurately capture your description of your friend, Susan Berman. Some of what was called characteristics. I believe you said she had a larger-than-life personality.
Correct.
Liked to be the center of attention.
I didn't say that.
I believe you said she did not turn away from being the center of attention. Do you recall that?
No.
Okay. The more dramatic the situation, the better for her liking.
I never said that.
Moody,
I didn't use those words.
a lot of issues,
Yes.
mental breakdowns,
Yes.
fall apart mentally,
Yes.
and lastly, mental health issues.
I know that she's a psychiatrist.
And given your PhD and your very
I don't have a PhD. I have a master's.
Given your master's and your craft, these are terms that are understood by you very well.
Yes.
Ms. Bailey, I also asked you about Ms. Berman's statement of who she did something for. You recall that?
Yes.
And again, he wanted to highlight your level of certainty, right?
Yes.
Let's talk about that subject for one moment. Slide 2, please. All right, you see the caption, did Susan say who she did something for?
Yes.
Now, I'm going to read this so it's in the record, making sure I've covered my bases. Mr. Lewis, did she say who? Agree. Did she say who, in reference to, she was doing something for or anything like that? Your answer, no. Not that I remember. Maybe, but I don't remember. Now, Mr. Lewis talks to you about that yet again. This time he says, yeah, on a scale of 1 to 100, with 1 being you're not sure at all, and 100 being you're absolutely positive, that Susan leaned forward to you and said, Bobby asked me to do something and I did it. Your answer, 99. All right, I read that correctly?
For the record, the two quotes that are on the slide, they're from 2 different interviews at 2 different times.
I appreciate that, Mr. Bailey. That's what I'm about to ask. So, from the morning to the night, we see the difference from left to right, correct?
Yes.
And for the record, your answer in the morning was after Mr. Lewis's question, correct? Your answer? Okay. Your answer in the evening was in response to Mr. Lewis's inquiry, correct?
Correct.
You recall, Ms. Barnes, that there was a question about whether or not you connected the statement Susan Berman was saying to you to the fact that Kathy was missing. Remember talking about that?
Yes.
All right. Slide 3, please. Relative to this testimony you gave yesterday, you were asked about this by Mr. Lewin back in December of 2016, correct?
Yes.
And that was those phone calls that we've talked about, one in the morning, one in the evening, right?
Yes.
In the morning call, Mr. Lewin says, so, this is what I'm trying to figure out, Miriam. So now, during this conversation, she tells you that Kathy has disappeared in the way that she told you. Was she implying, or was she stating directly that Kathy just kind of took off with somebody? Or was she implying that Bobby had done something and had something to do with it? Your answer. I don't think she was trying to imply Bobby had anything to do with it. Your answer, right?
Yes. Can I say one thing? The difference between the...
I'm sorry, that's my fault.
The slide is, he asked a question that did not pertain to this slide.
Right.
I think perhaps by mistake.
Quite my mistake.
He's asking to respond.
I want to explain that when they first called me that morning at work, I was so nervous and frightened when they first called. I didn't expect a call from them. It was very early in the morning. I was ready to start work. I had patients banging on my door. I just wanted to get them off the phone.
Thank you.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
May continue your process.
Thank you, Your Honor. Mr. Bailey, I didn't give you. No, I put the wrong one. I want to make sure you have this. All right. Let me backtrack. More technical difficulty in this moment. For the discussion about whether you connected the statements that Susan Berman made to you about she did something today to if something happens to me, Bobby did. Were those connected in the conversation? Remember that?
Yes.
Okay. So Mr. Lewin, again, what I'm trying to get at is she is saying, so she's saying, I've done something. And then, does she immediately, at that point, say, if something happens to me, Bobby did it? Or were they separate kind of things? Your answer. It was part of the same conversation.
Yes.
All that?
Yes.
Then Mr. Lewin, when he calls you later on this same subject, says, and so I did something today. And then immediately, if something I did something today, if something happens to me, Bobby did. Your answer, yes.
Yeah.
You would agree with me, Ms. Barnes. Obviously, your answer when Mr. Lewin goes at this the first time is different than the second time.
He was part of the same conversation.
I agree. What Mr. Lewin is getting at in a second, you'll notice, is the immediacy. Right?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Last but not least, I think you'll recall what I started to ask you about a second ago for the technical difficulty of whether you connected what Susan was saying to the fact that Kathy was missing. Remember talking about that yesterday?
Yes.
Okay. Slide 4, please. ask you, this is on the evening call, and so during this, what I'm trying to figure out, Miriam, so now, during this conversation, she tells you that Kathy has disappeared. And the way that she told you, was she implying or was she stating directly that Kathy just kind of took off with somebody? Or was she implying that Bobby had done something to do with it? Your answer. I don't think she was trying to imply that Bobby had anything to do with it. Recall that?
Yeah.
So.
And I said that yesterday.
I'm quarreling with what you said yesterday. We're talking about the genesis of these statements. There?
Okay.
On the right hand of this screen, let me read what Mr. Lewis said to you. Okay. And obviously, and again, I want to be clear on this. I'm in no way judging you at all. I'm just trying to understand, as I'm listening to this, and you're finding out that during the same conversation that Kathy is missing, I'm just trying to understand whether it was you kind of didn't figure out what's going on, or was it more like, I don't want to be involved in this, I don't even want to think about what she was saying? Your answer. I think it was I don't want to know. Right? Let's focus on, you can take it. Our discussion about connecting the conversation you had with Ms. Berman to Kathy missing, and whether or not what Susan was saying, whether she directly or she implied that it was a bad thing. You may have said this, but I want to be clear on Barnes. You came to those conclusions through your own supposition, correct?
Yes.
Because Susan never told you this.
Never told me what you think.
That Kathy was missing was a result of the call she had allegedly made or done for Bob.
No, she did not.
Nor did she tell you that what she had done was a bad thing.
That's true.
Similarly, towards the end of your testimony yesterday, and I'm not quarreling with your personal opinion, I think you're perfectly entitled to it. You gave some opinions on your thoughts about Mr. Durst's complicity in Susan's death. You remember that?
Yes.
Now, this was after you had been told a number of things from people you know and love about the TV series on HBO, The Jinx. This was after things you had read or also heard about Mr. Durst's prior legal cases, right?
Yes. And it was also, I said, I remembered it at Susan's funeral.
Right. What I'm getting at is, you stated your opinion about Mr. Durst's complicity relative to Susan's death. You remember that?
Yes.
Yeah. That also, like these two statements, was based on supposition from things you've been told about the Jinx, things you've read, correct?
Things I read. It wasn't from the Jinx. I thought it before, that's why I didn't watch the Jinx. And I had come to the supposition at Susan's funeral.
Very fair. That was your supposition.
Yes.
Now, let's talk about Susan's funeral for a moment, man. At that funeral, there were a number of loved ones, family members, people that were very close to her.
Yes.
And you attended that very service and talked with those folks. And during those talks, it became very clear that it was those folks believed that her boyfriend had killed her.
Right.
For the record, Bob Durst was never Susan Berman's boyfriend, was he?
No, listen. From what you told me.
And from what you observed in that, I think that the time you met, clearly they weren't boyfriend and girl.
No, we were very close friends.
Right. Let's turn to the New York Times and Mr. Bagley. You testified yesterday that you had discussed your Susan conversation with Mr. Greenhouse.
Yes.
Now, Mr. Greenhouse is a dear friend of yours
Yes.
who was and is retired author of the New York Times. He was very well respected in his writing, his columns, and he's also a lawyer. True?
Yes.
You had discussions with him about this Susan conversation multiple times over the years, correct?
A few times, yes.
More than one?
More than one.
All right. And by the way, you never told Mr. Greenhouse that Susan mentioned Kathy's disappearance in that conversation, did you?
No.
These discussions that you had with Mr. Greenhouse, at least some of them were before you ever agreed to speak with Mr. Bagley, correct?
Yes.
You then began to have a series of conversations with Mr. Bagley, correct?
Yes.
It was only after the Jinx aired, the family gathering that you had where people were attempting to tell you details about the Jinx, that you agreed to let Mr. Bagley use your name, correct?
It was more that my mother had just passed.
I understand there's a lot more to it.
There was a lot to it.
I'm just getting at the timing.
Okay, yes, yes.
It was after those events, your mother's passing, hearing about the Jinx, that you decided to let Mr. Bagley attribute your name to the story.
Yes.
Now, if I understand your testimony correctly, you chose to not share this information that you had for some 40 years with any law enforcement agencies, correct?
That's true.
Now, this is despite your very dear friend and confidant, Mr. Greenhouse, telling you that you should, correct?
Yes.
You have stated that he urged you originally to go to law enforcement, correct?
Yes, he gave me two options. He would go to law enforcement, go to the press.
And you're an educated and seem to be very intelligent lady. Do you agree with me?
I think so.
I think you are too. As such, surely you at least crossed your mind that you could seek confidentiality or anonymity either with the press or law enforcement, true?
No, I didn't.
Okay, never crossed your mind.
That I would get anonymity, no.
You never confided in anyone in law enforcement and asked if you could make a confidential report then?
No, I didn't.
You never considered sending an anonymous letter to the authorities?
No.
Now, relative to your decision to never disclose this to law enforcement prior to Mr. Bagley, even Mr. Lewin voiced his displeasure with your decision, didn't he?
No.
And you testified in a number of ways yesterday that you held this conversation out of public view, the press or law enforcement, let's say, for over 40 years because of concerns for your safety.
Yes.
Yet,
Not at that time. I didn't. It was more after Susan died.
well, let's just say instead of 40 years, 15 years. Is that fair?
Yes.
And you were so concerned about your safety, Ms. Barnes, that you chose to disclose your identity to the most venerable paper in the entire world. Is that right?
I wouldn't call it venerable, but
It's pretty well read, isn't it, Ms. Barnes?
yes, it is. At that point, I had just said fun, but I didn't realize the consequences. I really was not aware of the consequences.
Thank you very much for your time, Ms. Barnes. You are out of class.
Mr. Bailey, your direct examination.
Thank you.
Saving that for another time.
Good morning again. Would you say you're a person who's really good with dates or not so good with dates?
Dates?
Yeah.
No.
And not so good?
Being an artist, numbers were never my favorite.
Okay. Notwithstanding your issues with dates in particular, how certain are you that this conversation that we're talking about with Susan happened at the same point in time when Kathleen's disappearance had become a big deal in the media?
I didn't know about Kathy's disappearance when Susan first told me, but after that it was in the paper.
But I guess I asked a little bit of a vague question. How certain are you that this conversation occurred in the same week that it became a big story?
I'm very certain. Positive.
I'm going to play a clip from you, interview 1, page 8, line 12 through 23. Please listen to this. 12 through 20, your first interview.
You were starting to tell us Miriam said you had a conversation with Susan a day or two after Kathy disappeared. Go ahead.
She said, what John said, you know.
Can
She asked me to come up. And she said she did something. And she said, well, you know, if something happened to me, I did it.
So she said she did something.
Yeah.
Do you recall those statements?
Yes.
You made those statements to us during the first time we spoke with you, is that right?
I guess the first time, I don't know whether it was the morning or the night.
Okay.
Are you marking this?
People spoke.
Thank you.
And the audio.
Transcript of, let's identify this specifically, transcript of
Interview
interview with
with Miriam Barnes, December 27th, 2016, page 8, lines 12 through 23.
Thank you.
Morning interview. Did Mr. Lewin tell you what to say when you were relating to us what occurred? Were you relating to us, to the best of your ability, what you knew from your own mind because you were the one there who experienced it?
Yes.
Okay. You said you had an opportunity to read, at some point, Mr. Baden's article, is that right?
That morning, he emailed it to me.
7-page document, remember, as People's 13? So, never?
Yeah.
Do you recall, did you tell Mr. Bagley that Ms. Berman during this conversation was very nervous and very sad?
Yes.
Did you tell Mr. Bagley that Susan had told you, Bobby asked me to do something and I did it?
Yes.
Did you tell Mr. Bagley that Susan said, if anything happens to me, just remember Bobby did it.
Yes.
Did you tell Mr. Badley these things before you had ever met Mr. Lewin?
Yes.
Did you tell Mr. Badley these things before you had ever met me?
Yes.
Did you tell Mr. Badley these things before you had ever met Detective Camacho or Detective Shanley or any other LAPD police officer on this case?
Yes.
Why did you tell Mr. Badley these things before you met us? Why did you tell him these things?
I don't have a great answer for that. I know that my friend said that I had to step up and for my friend, and he said I could trust Charlie Bagley, and
were you making any things up?
no.
Okay. Did you express your fear to Mr. Greenhouse?
Yes.
Did you express your fear to Mr. Greenhouse on more than one occasion?
Yes.
Did you express your fear to Mr. Greenhouse before you met Mr. Lewin?
Yes.
Did you express your fear to Mr. Greenhouse before you met me or any other LAPD officer on this case?
Yes.
Were you afraid after Susan's funeral when you realized what in your mind you believe Robert Durst had done to your friend?
Yes.
I believe you testified that you were petrified, is that correct?
Yes.
And you were petrified before you met us.
Yes.
Were you petrified when you learned and believed in your mind that this defendant, Mr. Robert Durst, had chopped a man into pieces in Texas?
Yes.
And were you petrified of that before you met Mr. Lewin or myself or any other LAPD officer?
Yes.
Did anything that we did or said cause you to be more afraid than you already were?
Yes.
How so?
Just the fact that I was involved, and I tried to not use Bobby's name when I spoke to you. I was editing myself because I was scared.
So is it our involvement made you more afraid because we caused you to become a part of this process?
Yes.
I guess what I'm asking is, did we say things to make you more afraid than you were?
No, it just was the fact that I was being brought into this that frightened me.
Do you want to be here right now?
No.
When we told you you were going to have to come out here and testify, what was your response?
No, I don't want to come.
Did we explain to you the subpoena power of the court and how we could really make you come here?
Yes.
Did you tape these calls that the defense has been playing?
Me?
Yeah.
No.
Who taped them?
I guess you did.
Okay. I think you said yesterday. How many times have you been married?
Once.
I believe I'm cross-examining Mr. Lewis was asking you some questions about what you've previously said and what you've expressed at different times about whether you knew or believed what Susan Berman did was a good or a bad thing.
Right.
Let me ask you this. When Susan Berman told you, Bobby asked me to do something today and I did it, if something happens to you, just remember Bobby did it. Did that sound to you like it's been a good thing or a bad thing?
It sounded like a good thing.
Do you have a moment? Mr. Lewis asked you some questions and showed you some slides about conversations you had with us regarding speaking with the defense vessel.
Yes.
Did we tell you it was your decision whether you should or shouldn't speak with the defense?
Yes.
And did you make your own personal decision?
Yes.
And what was your decision?
But I didn't want to.
I have nothing further. Thank you.
Very briefly on this, Mr. Lewis, thank you.
You were sure to tell?
Sorry. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to.
Do you want to?
May I go first?
That might be better if he goes first.
Yeah, you say that.
Unending series of examinations. Okay. Yeah.
I had read you an answer from People's 13. I just never asked you. Is that the same thing you had read in the New York Times?
Yes.
Okay.
All right, thank you. All right, Mr. Lewis.
Thank you, Your Honor. People are going to help.
You were sure to tell us, Miriam, you said you had a conversation with Susan a day or two after Kathy disappeared. Go ahead.
She said what John said, you know. She asked me to come up. And she said she did something. And she said, I want you to know that if something happens to me, I did.
So she said she did something.
Yeah.
Ms. Barnes, I want to focus on line 15 there, Mr. Lewis statement. A day or two after Kathy disappeared. Go ahead. See that?
Yeah.
So again, those are Mr. Lewis' words about a day or two after Kathy disappeared, not yours. Correct. It's Mr. Lewis' words, aren't they?
Yes.
This is a 12, is it a 12-8? 12.
I'm going to try to do this expeditiously, Ms. Barnes. Would you be surprised to learn that neither call 1 or call 2 on December 27th you ever mentioned having a conversation within days of Kathy disappearing? Not 1 day, not 2 days, not a couple of weeks. Nowhere. Does that surprise you?
I don't know what you're trying to...
What I'm trying to say is line 15 is Mr. Lewin's word, a day or two after Kathy disappeared.
Right, because as I said yesterday, I didn't know the timeline.
Understood. You never said a day or two, you never said a week, you didn't say anything like that.
No.
Those are Mr. Lewin's words, right?
Yes.
You've seen Mr. Bagley here in the courtroom.
For the first time yesterday, yes.
Did you speak to him?
Hello. Nice to meet you.
Finally met him in person.
Yeah.
Your Honor, lastly, to make sure I believe Robin, this is 0, 5 O's, Your Honor. Poor page. Thank you again, Ms. Barnes.
Any additional questions, Mr. Bailey?
Oh, yes.
Thank you, ma'am.
Can you put that? And we'll be, do I can?
Appreciate this exhibit.
People are father.
You were sure to tell us, Miriam, you said you had a conversation with Susan a day or two after Kathy disappeared. Go ahead.
She said what John said, you know. She asked me to come up. And she said she did something. And she said, I want you to know that if something happens to me, I did.
So she said she did something.
For the record, this is people's quote. People's quote. So Mr. Lewis was just asking you questions referring to Mr. Lewin saying a day or two after Kathy disappeared, go ahead, suggesting that those were Mr. Lewin's words, not yours. Do you recall those questions just now?
Yes.
Okay. I would like to just back up to the page before this, and the 021, page 7, lines 21 to 25. May I mark this as People's 14?
Is it the same document?
Oh.
You mark the whole interview? Or you mark it page by page?
We were doing an audio clip last hearing. Each audio clip was separate.
Okay.
Oh.
Thank you. Okay, 14 and 14.
Okay. I'd like you to listen to this.
It's page 7, lines 21 through 25.
Do you remember, Miriam, when that took place in reference to when Kathy disappeared?
A day or two.
Would a day or two before, after?
Okay. Whose words were those?
Those were mine.
Did Mr. Lewin suggest to you that it was a day or two? Or were those your words?
Those were mine.
Did Mr. Lewin suggest to you that it was after, or were those your words?
Those are my words, I said.
And this part of the conversation occurred before the clip Mr. Lewis just played, where Mr. Lewin said a day or two after.
Now I know. I didn't know which one came first and which one came second.
Now you know?
Now I know.
I'm glad we know. Thank you.
Shall I excuse me?
No objection, Your Honor.
You're excused, Ms. Barnes.
Exhibits, Mr. Henderson?
Your Honor, we've completed testimony of Miriam Barnes. That was 76. I have in my hand a 2-page document. This is a sheet that references the 5 exhibits played in the video with new exhibit numbers for trial. People's 76C is a 1-page photograph. In the video, it was People's 11. People's 76D is a 1-page transcript. In the video, it was People's 12A. People's 76E is a 7-page article. In the video, it was People's 13. People's 76F is a 1-page transcript. In the video, it was People's 14A. And finally, People's 76G is 4 pages of slides. In the video, it was defense 5 O's. We ask these exhibits be marked for identification.
Mark. Well, I think we could take our morning recess. It's about 10:20, so until 10:35, ladies and gentlemen, we will recess. Do not converse among yourselves or with anyone else on any subject connected with the case. Do not form or express any opinion on the case. Thank you.